Fourth iteration. Inevitably, underlying instabilities begin to appear. Ian Malcolm. The main road. Rain drummed loudly on the roof of the Land Cruiser. Tim felt the night vision goggles pressing heavily on his forehead. He reached for the knob near his ear and adjusted the intensity. There was a brief phosphorescent flare, and then, in shades of electronic green and black, he could see the Land Cruiser behind, with Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm inside. Neat! Dr. Grant was staring out of the front windshield toward him. Tim saw him pick up the radio from the dash. There was a burst of static, and then he heard Dr. Grant's voice. "Can you see us back there?" Tim picked up the radio from Ed Regis. "I see you." "Everything all right?" "We're fine, Dr. Grant." "Stay in the car." "We will. Don't worry." He clicked the radio off. Ed Regis snorted. "It's pouring down rain. Of course we'll stay in the car," he muttered. Tim turned to look at the foliage at the side of the road. Through the goggles, the foliage was a bright electronic green, and beyond he could see sections of the green grid pattern of the fence. The Land Cruisers were stopped on the downslope of a hill, which must mean that they were someplace near the Tyrannosaur area. It would be amazing to see a Tyrannosaur with these night vision goggles. A real thrill. Maybe the Tyrannosaur would come to the fence and look over at them. Tim wondered if its eyes would glow in the dark when he saw them. That would be neat. But he didn't see anything, and eventually he stopped looking. Everyone in the cars felt silent. The rain thrummed on the roof of the car. Sheets of water streamed down over the sides of the windows. It was hard for Tim to see out, even with the goggles. "How long have you been sitting here?" Malcolm asked. "I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. I wonder what the problem is. Maybe a short circuit from the rain?" "But it happened before the rain really started." There was another silence. In a tense voice, Lex said, "But there's no lightning, right?" She'd always been afraid of lightning, and she now sat nervously, squeezing her leather mitt in her hands. Dr. Grant said, "What was that? We didn't quite read that." "Just my sister talking." "Oh." Tim again scanned the foliage, but saw nothing. Certainly nothing as big as a Tyrannosaur. He began to wonder if the Tyrannosaurs came out at night. Were they nocturnal animals? Tim wasn't sure if he had ever read that. He had a feeling that Tyrannosaurs were all-weather, day or night animals. The time of day didn't matter to a Tyrannosaur. The rain continued to pour. "Hell of a rain," Ed Regis said. "It's really coming down." Lex said, "I'm hungry." "I know that, Lex," Regis said, "but we're stuck here, sweetie. The cars run on electricity and have buried cables in the road." "Stuck for how long?" "Until they fix the electricity." Listening to the sound of the rain, Tim felt himself growing sleepy. He yawned and turned to look at the palm trees on the left side of the road, and was startled by a sudden thump as the ground shook. He swung back just in time to catch a glimpse of a dark shape as it swiftly crossed the road between the two cars. "Jesus!" "What is it?" It was huge. It was as big as the car." "Tim, are you there?" He picked up the radio. "Yes, I'm here." "Did you see it, Tim?" "No," Tim said. "I missed it." "What the hell was it?" Malcolm said. "Are you wearing the night vision goggles, Tim?" "Yes, I'll watch," Tim said. "Was it the Tyrannosaur?" Ed Regis asked. Tim felt bad that he had missed seeing the animal, whatever it was. There was a sudden white crack of lightning, and his night vision goggles flared bright green. He blinked his eyes and started counting. 1,000, 2, 1,000. The thunder crashed, deafeningly loud and very close. Lex began to cry. "Oh no!" "Take it easy, honey," Edward just said. "It's just lightning." Tim scanned the side of the road. The rain was coming down hard now, shaking the leaves with hammering drops. It made everything move. Everything seemed alive. He scanned the leaves. He stopped. There was something beyond the leaves. Tim looked up. Higher. Behind the foliage, beyond the fence, he saw a thick body with a pebbled, grainy surface like the bark of a tree. But it wasn't a tree. He continued to look higher, sweeping the goggles upward. He saw the huge head of the Tyrannosaurus, just standing there, looking over the fence at the two land cruisers. The lightning flashed again, and the big animal rolled its head and bellowed in the glaring light. Then darkness, and silence again, and the pounding rain. "Tim?" "Yes, Dr. Grant?" "You see what it is?" "Yes, Dr. Grant." Tim had a sense that Dr. Grant was trying to talk in a way that wouldn't upset his sister. "What's going on right now?" "Nothing," Tim said, watching the Tyrannosaur through the night goggles. "Just standing on the other side of the fence." "I can't see much from here, Tim." "I could see fine, Dr. Grant. It's just standing there." "Okay." Lex continued to cry, snuffling. There was another pause. Tim watched the Tyrannosaur. The head was huge. The animal looked from one vehicle to another, then back again. It seemed to stare right at Tim. In the goggles, the eyes glowed bright green. Tim felt a chill, but then as he looked down the animal's body, moving down from the massive head and jaws, he saw the smaller, muscular forelimb. It waved in the air and then gripped the fence. "Jesus Christ!" Nedry just said, staring out the window. "The greatest predator the world has ever known. The most fearsome attack in human history." Somewhere in the back of his publicist's brain, Nedry just was still writing copy. But he could feel his knees begin to shake uncontrollably. His trousers flapping like flags. Jesus, he was frightened. He didn't want to be here. Alone among all the people in the two cars. Nedry just knew what a dinosaur attack was like. He knew what happened to people. He had seen the mangled bodies that resulted from a raptor attack. He could picture it in his mind, and this was a Rex. Much, much bigger. The greatest meteor that ever walked the earth. Jesus. When the Tyrannosaur roared, it was terrifying. A scream from some other world. Nedry just felt the spreading warmth in his trousers. He'd peed his pants. He was simultaneously embarrassed and terrified, but he knew he had to do something. He couldn't just stay there. He had to do something. Something. His hands were shaking, trembling against the dash. "Jesus Christ," he said again. "Bad language," Lex said, wagging her finger at him. Tim heard the sound of a door opening, and he swung his head away from the Tyrannosaur. The night vision goggles streaked laterally in time to see Nedry just stepping out through the open door, ducking his head in the rain. "Hey!" Lex said. "Where are you going?" Nedry just turned and ran in the opposite direction for the Tyrannosaur, disappearing into the woods. The door to the land cruiser hung open. The paneling was getting wet. "He left," Lex said. "Where'd he go? He left us alone." "Shut the door," Tim said. But she had started to scream. "He left us! He left us!" "Tim, what's going on?" It was Dr. Grant on the radio. "Tim!" Tim leaned forward and tried to shut the door. From the back seat, he couldn't reach the handle. He looked back at the Tyrannosaur's lightning flashed again, momentarily silhouetting the huge black shape against the white flaring sky. "Tim, what's happening?" "He left us! He left us!" Tim blinked to recover his vision. When he looked again, the Tyrannosaur was standing there, exactly as before, motionless and huge. Rain dripped from its jaws. The forelimb gripped the fence. And then Tim realized the Tyrannosaur was holding onto the fence. The fence wasn't electrified anymore. "Lex, close the door!" The radio crackled. "Tim!" "I'm here, Dr. Grant. What's going on?" "Reed just ran away," Tim said. "He what?" "He ran away. I think he saw that the fence isn't electrified," Tim said. "The fence isn't electrified?" Malcolm said over the radio. "Did he say the fence isn't electrified?" "Lex," Tim said. "Close the door!" But Lex was screaming. He left us! He left us! In a steady, monotonous wail. And there was nothing for Tim to do but climb out of the back door into the slashing rain and shut the door for her. Thunder rumbled, and the lightning flashed again. Tim looked up and saw the Tyrannosaur crashing down the cyclone fence with a giant hind limb. Timmy! He jumped back in and slammed the door, the sound lost in the thunderclap. The radio. Tim, are you there? He grabbed the radio. I'm here. He turned to Lex. Lock the doors. Get in the middle of the car and shut up. Outside, the Tyrannosaur rolled its head and took an awkward step forward. The claws of its feet had caught in the grid of the flattened fence. Lex saw the animal finally and became silent, still. She watched with wide eyes. Radio crackle. Tim! Yes, Dr. Grant. Stay in the car. Stay down. Be quiet. Don't move. And don't make noise. Okay. You should be alright. I don't think I can open the car. Okay. Just stay quiet, so you don't arouse its attention any more than necessary. Okay. Tim clicked the radio off. You hear that, Lex? His sister nodded silently. She never took her eyes off the dinosaur. The Tyrannosaur roared. In the glare of lightning, they saw it pull free of the fence and take bounding step forward. Now it was standing between the two cars. Tim couldn't see Dr. Grant's car anymore because the huge body blocked his view. The rain ran in rivulets down the pebbled skin of the muscular hind legs. He couldn't see the animal's head, which was high above the roofline. The Tyrannosaur moved around the side of their car. It went to the very spot where Tim had gotten out of the car, where Ed Regis had gotten out of the car. The animal paused there, the big head ducked down toward the mud. Tim looked back at Dr. Grant and Dr. Malcolm in the rear car. Their faces were tense as they stared forward through the windshield. The huge head raised back up, jaws open, and then stopped by the side windows. In the glare of lightning, they saw the beady, expressionless reptile eye moving in the socket. It was looking in the car. His sister's breath came out in ragged, frightened gasps. He reached out and squeezed her arm, hoping she would stay quiet. The dinosaur continued to flare for a long time with the side window. Perhaps the dinosaur couldn't really see them, he thought. Finally, the head lifted up out of the view again. Timmy! Lex whispered. It's okay, Tim whispered. I don't think it saw us. He was looking back toward Dr. Grant when a jolting impact rocked the Land Cruiser and shattered the windshield in a spiderweb as the Tyrannosaur's head crashed against the hood of the Land Cruiser. Tim was knocked flat in the seat, and the night vision goggles slid off his forehead. He got back up quickly, blinking in the darkness, his mouth warm with blood. Lex! He couldn't see his sister anywhere. The Tyrannosaur stood near the front of the Land Cruiser, its chest moving as it breathed, the forelimbs making clawing movements in the air. Lex! Tim whispered. Then he heard her groan. She was lying somewhere on the floor under the front seat, and the huge head came down, entirely blocking the shattered windshield. The Tyrannosaur banged again on the front hood of the Land Cruiser. Tim grabbed the seat as the car rocked on its wheels. The Tyrannosaur banged down twice more, denting the metal. Then it moved around the side of the car. The big raised tail blocked his view out of all the side windows. At the back, the animal snorted, a deep rumbling growl that blended with the thunder. It sank its jaws into the spare tire mounted on the back of the Land Cruiser, and in a single head shake, tore it away. The rear of the car lifted into the air for a moment, then it thumped down with a muddy splash. Tim! Dr. Grant said. Tim, are you there? Tim grabbed the radio. We're okay, he said. There was a shrill metallic scrape as claws raked the roof of the car. Tim's heart was pounding in his chest. He couldn't see anything out of the windows of the right side except for pebbled, leathery flesh. The Tyrannosaur was leaning against the car, which rocked back and forth with each breath, and springs and metal creaking loudly. Lex groaned again. Tim put down the radio and started to crawl over to the front seat. The Tyrannosaur roared and the metal roof dented downward. Tim felt a sharp pain as his head stumbled toward the floor, onto the transmission hump. He found himself lying alongside Lex, and he was shocked to see that the whole side of her head was covered in blood. She looked unconscious. There was another jolting impact, and pieces of glass fell all around him. Tim felt rain. He looked up and saw that the front windshield had broken out. It was just a jagged rim of glass, and beyond the big head of the dinosaur, looking down at him. Tim felt a sudden chill, and then the head rushed forward toward him, the jaws open. There was a squeal of metal against teeth, and he felt the hot stinking breath of the animal, and a thick tongue stuck to the car through the windshield opening. The tongue slapped wetly around the inside of the car. He felt the hot lather of dinosaur saliva, and the tyrannosaur roared, a deafening sound inside the car. The head pulled away abruptly. Tim scrambled up, avoiding the dent of the roof. There was still room to sit on the front seat of the passenger door. The tyrannosaur stood in the rain near the front fender. It seemed confused by what had happened to it. Blood dripped freely from its jaws. The tyrannosaur looked at Tim, cocking its head to stare with one big eye. The head moved close to the car, sideways, and peered in. Blood spattered on the dented hood of the Land Cruiser, mixing with the rain. "It can't get to me," Tim thought. "It's too big." Then the head pulled away, and in the flare of lightning he saw the hind leg lift up, and the world tilted crazily as Land Cruiser slammed over on its side, the window splatting in the mud. He saw Lex fall helplessly against the side window, and he fell down beside her, banging his head. Tim felt dizzy. Then the Tyrannosaur's jaws clamped onto the window frame, and the whole Land Cruiser was lifted up into the air, and shaken. "Timmy!" Lex shrieked, so near to his ear that it hurt. She was suddenly awake, and he grabbed her as the Tyrannosaur crashed the car down again. Tim felt a stabbing pain in his side, and his sister fell on top of him. The car went up again, tilting crazily. Lex shouted, "Timmy!" and he saw the door give away beneath her, and she fell out of the car into the mud. But Tim couldn't answer because, in the next instant, everything swung crazily. He saw the trunks of the palm trees sliding downward past him, moving sideways through the air. He glimpsed the ground very far below, and the hot roar of the Tyrannosaur, the blazing eye, the tops of the palm trees, and then, with a metallic scraping shriek, the car fell from the Tyrannosaur's jaws. A sickening fall, and Tim's stomach heaved in the moment before the world became totally black and silent. In the other car, Malcolm gasped, "Jesus, what happened to the car?" Grant blinked his eyes as the lightning faded. The other car was gone. Grant couldn't believe it. He peered forward, trying to see through the rain-streaked windshield. The dinosaur's body was so large, it was probably just blocking. No. In another flash of lightning, he saw clearly the car was gone. "What happened?" Malcolm said. I don't know." Faintly over the rain, Grant heard the sound of the little girl screaming. The dinosaur was standing in the darkness on the road up ahead, but they could see well enough to know that it was bending over now, sniffing the ground. Or eating something on the ground. "Can you see?" Malcolm said, squinting. "Not much, no," Grant said. The rain pounded on the roof of the car. He listened for the little girl, but didn't hear her anymore. The two men sat in the car listening. "Was it the girl?" Malcolm said finally. "It sounded like the girl." "It did, yes." "Was it?" I don't know," Grant said. He felt the seeping fatigue overtake him, blurred through the raining windshield. The dinosaur was coming toward their car. Slow, ominous strides, coming right towards them. Malcolm said, "You know, at times like this one feels, well, perhaps extinct animals should be left extinct. Don't you have that feeling now?" "Yes," Grant said. He was feeling his heart pounding. Do you, have any suggestions about what we do now?" "I can't think of a thing," Grant said. Malcolm twisted the handle, kicked open the door, and ran. But even as he did, Grant could see he was too late. The Tyrannosaur, too close. There was another crack of lightning, and in that instant of glaring white light, Grant watched in horror as the Tyrannosaur roared and leaped forward. Grant was not clear about exactly what happened next. Malcolm was running, his feet splashing in the mud. The Tyrannosaur bounded alongside him and dunked its massive head, and Malcolm was tossed into the air like a small doll. By then, Grant was out of the car too, feeling the cold rain slashing his face and body. The Tyrannosaur had turned its back to him, the huge tail swinging through the air. Grant was tensing to run for the woods when suddenly the Tyrannosaur spun back to face him and roared. Grant froze. He was standing beside the passenger door of the Land Cruiser, drenched in rain. He was completely exposed. The Tyrannosaur, no more than 8 feet away, the big animal roared again. At so close a range, the sound was terrifyingly loud. Grant felt himself shaking with cold and fright. He pressed his trembling hands against the metal of the door panel to steady them. The Tyrannosaur roared once more. But it did not attack. It cocked its head and looked with first one eye and then the other at the Land Cruiser, and it did nothing. It just stood there. What was going on? The powerful jaws opened and closed. The Tyrannosaur bellowed angrily, and then the big hind leg came up and crashed down on the roof of the car. The claws slid off with a metal screech, barely missing Grant as he stood there, still unmoving. The foot splashed in the mud, and the head ducked down in a slow arc, and the animal inspected the car, snorting. It peered into the front windshield, then moving toward the rear. It banged the passenger door shut, and moved right toward Grant as he stood there. Grant was dizzy with fear, his heart pounding inside his chest. With the animal so close, he could smell the rotten flesh in the mouth, the sweetish blood smell, the sickening stench of the carnivore. He tensed his body, awaiting the inevitable. The big head slid past him, toward the rear of the car. Grant blinked. What had happened? Was it possible the Tyrannosaur hadn't seen him? It seemed as if it hadn't, but how could that be? Grant looked back to see the animal sniffing the rear-mounted tire. It nudged the tire with its snout, and then the head swung back. Again, it approached Grant. This time the animal stopped, the black flaring nostrils just inches away. Grant felt the animal's startling hot breath on his face, but the Tyrannosaur wasn't sniffing like a dog. It was just breathing, and if anything, it seemed puzzled. No, the Tyrannosaur couldn't see him, not if he stood motionless, and in a detached academic corner of his mind, he found an explanation for that. A reason why. The jaws opened before him, the massive head raised up. Grant squeezed his fists together and bit his lip, trying desperately to remain motionless, to make no sound. The Tyrannosaur bellowed in the night's air. But by now Grant was beginning to understand. The animal couldn't see him, but it suspected he was there, somewhere, and was trying with its bellowing to frighten Grant into some revealing movement. So long as he stood his ground, Grant realized he was invisible. In a final gesture of frustration, the big hind leg lifted up and kicked the Land Cruiser over, and Grant felt searing pain and the surprising sensation of his own body flying through the air. It seemed to be happening very slowly, and he had plenty of time to feel the world turn colder, and watch the ground rush up to strike him in the face. Return. Oh, damn, Harding said. Will you look at that? They were sitting in Harding's gasoline-powered Jeep, staring forward past the flick of the windshield wipers. In the yellow flare of the headlamps, a big fallen tree blocked the road. Must have been the lightning, Jannar said. Hell of a tree. We can't get past it, Harding said. I better tell Arnold in control. He picked up the radio and twisted the channel dial. Hello, John. Are you there, John? There was nothing but steady hissing static. I don't understand, he said. The radio line seems to be down. Must be the storm, Jannar said. I suppose. Try the Land Cruisers, Ellie said. Harding opened the other channels, but there was no answer. They're probably back to camp by now, and outside the range of our little set. In any case, I don't think we should stay here. It'll be hours before maintenance gets a crew out here to move that tree. He turned the radio off and put the Jeep into reverse. What are you going to do? Ellie said. Go back to the turnout and get into the maintenance road. Fortunately, there's a second road system, Harding explained. We have one road for the visitors and a second road for animal handlers and the feed trucks and so on. We'll drive back on that maintenance road. It's a little longer, but not so scenic. But you may find it interesting. If the rain lets up, we'll get a glimpse of some of the animals at night. We should be back in 30-40 minutes, Harding said. If I don't get lost. He turned the Jeep around in the night and headed south again. Lightning flashed and every monitor in the control room went black. Arnold sat forward, his body rigid and tense. Jesus, not now. Not now. That was all he needed to have. Everything go out now in the storm. All the main power circuits were surge protected, of course, but Arnold wasn't sure about the modems Nedry was using for his data transmission. Most people didn't know it was possible to blow an entire system through a modem. The lightning pulse climbed back into the computer through the telephone line, and bang! No more motherboard. No more RAM. No more file server. No more computer. The screens flickered, and then, one by one, they came back on. Arnold sighed and collapsed back into his chair. He wondered again where Nedry had gone. 5 minutes ago he sent guards to search the building for him. The fat bastard was probably in the bathroom reading a comic book. But the guards hadn't come back, and they hadn't called in. 5 minutes. If Nedry was in the building, they should have found him by now. He only took the damn Jeep, Muldoon said as he came back into the room. Have you talked to the land cruisers yet? Can't raise them on the radio, Arnold said. I have to use this because the main board is down. It's weak, but it ought to work. I tried it on all 6 channels. I know they have radios in the cars, but they're not answering. That's not good, Muldoon said. If you want to go out there, take one of the maintenance vehicles. I would, Muldoon said, but they're all in the East Garage, more than a mile from here. Where's Harding? I assume he's on his way back. Then I'll pick up the people in the land cruisers on his way. I assume so. Anybody tell Hammond the kids aren't back yet? Hell no, Arnold said. I don't want that son of a bitch running around here screaming at me. Everything's alright for the moment. The land cruisers are just stuck in the rain. They can sit a while until Harding brings them back, or until they find Nedry. And make that little bastard turn the systems back on. You can't get them back on? Muldoon said. Arnold shook its head. I've been trying, but Nedry's done something to the system. Can't figure out what, but if I have to go into the code itself, that'll take hours. We need Nedry. We've got to find that son of a bitch right away. Nedry. The sign said electrified fence, 10,000 volts, do not touch. But Nedry opened it with his bare hand and unlocked the gate, swinging it wide. He went back to the Jeep, drove through the gate, and then walked back to close it behind him. Now he was inside the park itself, no more than a mile from the East Dock. He stepped on an accelerator and hunched forward over the steering wheel, peering through the rain-slashed windshield as he drove the Jeep down the narrow road. He was driving fast, too fast, but he had to keep his timetable. He was surrounded on all sides by black jungle, but soon he should be able to see the beach and the ocean off to his left. This damn storm, he thought. It might screw up everything, because if Dodgson's boat wasn't waiting for him at the East Dock, then Nedry got there, the whole plan would be ruined. Nedry couldn't wait very long, or he would be missed back at the control room. The whole idea behind the plan was he can drive to the East Dock, drop off the embryos, and be back in a few minutes, before anyone noticed. It was a good plan, a clever plan. Nedry worked on it carefully, refining every detail. This plan was going to make him $1.5 million, 1.5 meg. That was 10 years of incomes in a single, tax-free shot, and it was going to change his life. Nedry'd been damn careful, even to the point of making Dodgson meet him in the San Francisco airport at the last minute with an excuse about wanting to see the money. Actually, Nedry wanted to record his conversation with Dodgson and mention him by name on the tape, just so that Dodgson wouldn't forget he owed the rest of the money. Nedry was including a copy of the tape with the embryos. In short, Nedry had thought of everything, except this damn storm. Something dashed across the road, a white flash in his headlights. It looked like a large rat. It scurried into the underbrush, dragging a fat tail. Possum? Amazing that a possum could survive here. You'd think the dinosaurs would get an animal like that. Where was the damn dock? He was driving fast, and he'd already been gone 5 minutes. He should have reached the east dock by now. Had he taken a wrong turn? He didn't think so. He hadn't seen any forks in the road at all. Then where was the dock? It was a shock when he came around a corner and saw that the road terminated in a gray concrete barrier, 6 feet tall and streaked dark with rain. He slammed on the brakes, and the Jeep fishtailed, losing traction in an end-to-end spin, and for a horrified moment, he thought he was going to smash into the barrier. He knew he was going to smash, and he spun the wheel frantically, and the Jeep slid to a stop, the headlamps just a foot from the concrete wall. He paused there, listening to the rhythmic flick of the wipers. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. He looked back down the road. He obviously taken a wrong turn somewhere. He could retrace his steps, but that would take too long. He better try and find out where the hell he was. He got out of the Jeep, feeling heavy raindrops spatter his head. It was a real tropical storm, raining so hard it hurt. He glanced at his watch, pushing the button to illuminate the digital dial. 6 minutes gone. Where the hell was he? He walked around the concrete barrier, and on the other side, along with the rain, he heard the sound of gurgling water. Could it be the ocean? Nedry hurried forward, his eyes adjusting to the darkness as he went. Dense jungle on all sides, raindrops slapping on the leaves. The gurgling sound became louder, drawing him forward, and suddenly he came out of the foliage and felt his feet sink into soft earth and saw the dark currents of the river. The river? He was at the jungle river! Damn, he thought. At the river where? The river ran for miles to the island. He looked at his watch again. 7 minutes gone. You have a problem, Dennis, he said aloud. As if in reply, there was a soft hooting cry of an owl in the forest. Nedry hardly noticed. He was worrying about the plan. The plain fact was that time had run out. There wasn't a choice anymore. He had to abandon his original plan. All he could do was go back to the control room, restore the computer, and somehow try to contact Dodgson to set up the drop at the east dock for the following night. Nedry would have to scramble to make that work, but he thought he could pull it off. The computer automatically logged all calls. After Nedry got through to Dodgson, he'd have to go back to the computer and erase the record of the call. But one thing was sure, he couldn't stay out of the park any longer, or his absence would be noticed. Nedry started back, heading toward the glow of the car's headlights. He was drenched and miserable. He heard the soft hooting cry once more, and this time he paused. That hadn't really sounded like an owl, and it seemed to be close by, in the jungle somewhere off to his right. As he listened, he heard a crashing sound in the underbrush, then silence. He waited and heard it again. It sounded distinctly like something big, moving slowly through the jungle toward him. Something big. Something near. A big dinosaur. Get out of here. Nedry began to run. He made a lot of noise as he ran, but even so he could hear the animal crashing through the foliage and hooting. It was coming closer. Stumbling over tree roots in the darkness, clawing his way past dripping branches. He saw the Jeep ahead, and the lights shining around the vertical wall of the barrier made him feel better. In a moment, he'd be in the car, and then he'd get the hell out of here. He scrambled around the barrier, and then he froze. The animal was already there. But it wasn't close. The dinosaur stood 40 feet away, at the edge of the illumination from the headlamps. Nedry hadn't taken the tour, so he hadn't seen the different types of dinosaurs. But this one was strange looking. The 10-foot-tall body was yellow with black spots, and along the head ran a pair of red V-shaped crests. The dinosaur didn't move, but again gave a soft hooting cry. Nedry waited to see if it would attack. It didn't. Perhaps the headlights for the Jeeps frightened it, forcing it to keep its distance like a fire. The dinosaur stared at him, and then snapped its head in a single swift motion. Nedry felt something smack wetly against his chest. He looked down and saw a dripping glob of foam on his rain-soaked shirt. He touched it curiously, not comprehending. It was spit. The dinosaur had spit on him. It was creepy, he thought. He looked back at the dinosaur and saw the head snap again, and immediately felt another wet smack against his neck, just above his shirt collar. He wiped it away with his hand. Jesus, it was disgusting. But the skin of his neck was already starting to tingle and burn, and his hand was tingling too. It was almost like he'd been touched with acid. Nedry opened the car door, glancing back at the dinosaur to make sure it wasn't going to attack, and felt a sudden, excruciating pain in his eyes, stabbing like spikes to the back of his skull, and he squeezed his eyes shut and gasped at the intensity of it, and threw up his hands to cover his eyes, and felt the slippery foam trickling down both sides of his nose. Spit. The dinosaur had spit in his eyes. Even as he realized it, the pain overwhelmed him, and he dropped to his knees, disoriented, wheezing. He collapsed onto his side, his cheek pressed to the wet ground, his breath coming in thin whistles through the constant, ever-screaming pain that caused flashing spots of light to appear behind his tightly shut eyelids. The earth shook beneath him, and Nedry knew the dinosaur was moving. He could hear its soft hooting cry, and despite the pain, he forced his eyes open, and still he saw nothing but flashing spots against the black. Slowly, the realization came to him. He was blind. The hooting was louder as Nedry scrambled to his feet and staggered back against the side panel of the car as a wave of nausea and dizziness swept over him. The dinosaur was close now. He could feel it coming close. He was dimly aware of its snorting breath, but he couldn't see. He couldn't see anything, and his terror was extreme. He stretched out his hands, waving them wildly in the air to ward off the attack he knew was coming, and then there was a new, searing pain like a fiery knife in his belly, and Nedry stumbled, reaching blindly down to touch the ragged edge of his shirt, and then a thick, slippery mass that was surprisingly warm, and with horror, he suddenly knew he was holding his own intestines in his hands. The dinosaur had torn him open. His guts had fallen out. Nedry fell to the ground and landed on something scaly and cold. It was the animal's foot. And then there was a new pain on both sides of his head. The pain grew worse, and as he was lifted to his feet, he knew the dinosaur had his head in its jaws, and the horror of the realization that was followed by a final wish that it would all be ended soon. Bungalow. More coffee? Hammond asked politely. No, thank you, Henry said, leaning back in his chair. I couldn't eat anything more. They were sitting in the dining room of Hammond's bungalow, in a secluded corner of the park not far from the labs. Wu had to admit that the bungalow Hammond had built for himself was elegant, with sparse, almost Japanese lines, and the dinner had been excellent, considering the dining room wasn't fully staffed yet. But there was something about Hammond that Wu found troubling. The old man was different in some way, subtly different. All during dinner, Wu had tried to decide what it was. In part, a tendency to ramble, to repeat himself, to retell old stories. In part, an emotional liability. Flaring anger one moment, maudlin sentimentality the next. But all that could be understood as a natural concomitant of age. John Hammond was, after all, almost 77. But there was something else. A stubborn evasiveness. An insistence on having his way, and in the end, a complete refusal to deal with the situation that now faced the park. Wu had been stunned by the evidence. He did not yet allow himself to believe the case was proved, that the dinosaurs were breeding. After Grant had asked about amphibian DNA, Wu had intended to go directly to his laboratory and check the computer records of the various DNA assemblies. Because if the dinosaurs were in fact breeding, then everything about Jurassic Park was called into question. The genetic development methods, the genetic control methods, everything. Even the lysine dependency might be suspect. And if these animals could truly breed, and could also survive in the wild... Henry wanted to check the data at once, but Hammond had stubbornly insisted Wu accompany him at dinner. "Now then, Henry, you must save some room for ice cream," Hammond said, pushing back from the table. "Maria makes the most wonderful ginger ice cream." "All right." Wu looked at the beautiful, silent serving girl. His eyes followed her out of the room, and then he glanced up at the single video monitor mounted on the wall. The monitor was dark. Your monitor's out," Wu said. "Is it?" Hammond glanced over. "Must be the storm." He reached behind him for the telephone. "I'll just check in with John in control." Wu could hear the static crackle on the telephone line. Hammond shrugged and set the receiver back in its cradle. "Lines must be down," he said. "Or maybe Nedry's still doing data transmission. It was quite a few bugs to fix this weekend. Nedry's a genius in his way, but we had to press him quite hard towards the end to make sure he got things right." "Perhaps I should go to the control room and check," Wu said. No, Hammond said. "There's no reason. If there were any problem, we'd hear about it." "Ah!" Maria came back into the room with 2 plates of ice cream. "You must have just a little, Henry," Hammond said. "It's made with fresh ginger from the eastern part of the island. It's an old man's vice, ice cream, but still." Dutifully, Wu dipped his spoon. Outside, lightning flashed, and there was a sharp crack of thunder. "That was close," Wu said. "I hope the storm isn't frightening the children." "I shouldn't think so," Hammond said. He tasted the ice cream. "But I can't help but hold some fears about the park, Henry." Inwardly, Wu felt relieved. Perhaps the old man was going to face facts after all. What kind of fears? "You know, Jurassic Park's really made for children. The children of the world love dinosaurs, and the children are going to just delight in this place. Their little faces will shine with the joy of finally seeing these wonderful animals, but I'm afraid I may not live to see it, Henry. I may not live to see the joy on their faces." "I think there are other problems too," Wu said, frowning. "But none so pressing on my mind as this," Hammond said. "They may not live to see their shining, delighted faces. This is our triumph. This park, we have done what we set out to do, and you remember our original intent was to use the newly emerging technology of genetic engineering to make money. A lot of money." Wu knew Hammond was about to launch into his old speeches. He held up his hand. "I'm familiar with this, John. If you're going to start a bioengineering company, Henry, what would you do? Would you make products to help mankind? To fight illness and disease? Dear me, no. That's a terrible idea. A very poor use of new technology." Hammond shook his head sadly. "Yet, you'll remember," he said, "the original genetic engineering companies like Genentech and Cetus were all started to make pharmaceuticals, new drugs for mankind. Noble purpose. Unfortunately, drugs face all kinds of barriers. FDA testing alone takes 5 to 8 years if you're lucky. Even worse, there are forces at work in the marketplace. Suppose you make a miracle drug for cancer or heart disease, as Genentech did. Suppose you now want to charge $1,000 or $2,000 a dose. You might imagine that is your privilege, after all. You invested the drug, you paid to develop and test it. You should be able to charge whatever you wish. But do you really think that's what the government will let you do all that? No, Henry, they will not. Sick people aren't going to pay $1,000 a dose for needed medication. They won't be grateful. They'll be outraged. Blue Cross isn't going to pay it. They'll scream highway robbery. So, something will happen. Your patent application will be denied. Your permits will be delayed. Something will force you to see reason and to sell your drug at a lower cost. From a business standpoint, That makes helping mankind a very risky business. Personally, I would never help mankind. Wu had heard this argument before, and he knew Hammond was right. Some new bioengineered pharmaceuticals had indeed suffered inexplicable delays and patent problems. Now, Hammond said, think of how different it is when you're making entertainment. Nobody needs entertainment. That's not a matter for government intervention. If I charge $5,000 a day for my park, who's going to stop me? After all, nobody needs to come here. And far from being highway robbery, a costly price tag actually increases the appeal of the park. A visit becomes a status symbol, and all Americans love that. So do the Japanese, and of course they have far more money. Hammond finished his ice cream, and Maria silently took away the dish. She's not from here, you know, he said. She's Haitian. Her mother is French, but in any case, Henry, you'll recall that the original purpose behind pointing my company in this direction in the first place was to have freedom from government intervention anywhere in the world. Speaking of the rest of the world, Hammond smiled, we have already leased a large tract in the Azores for Jurassic Park Europe. And you know we long obtained an island near Guam for Jurassic Park Japan. Construction on the next 2 Jurassic Parks will begin early next year. They will all be open within 4 years. At that time, direct revenues will exceed $10 billion a year, with merchandising, television, and ancillary rights should double that. I see no reason to bother with children's pets, which I'm told Lou Dodgen thinks we're planning to make. $20 billion a year? Wu said softly, shaking his head. That's speaking conservatively, Hammond said, and he smiled. There's no reason to speculate wildly. More ice cream, Henry? Did you find him? Arnold snapped when the guard walked into the control room. No, Mr. Arnold. Find him. I don't think he's in the building, Mr. Arnold. Then look in the lodge, Arnold said. Look at the maintenance building. Look at the utility shed. Look everywhere. Just find him. The thing is, the guard hesitated. Mr. Nedry is the fat man. Is that right? That's right, Arnold said. He's fat. A fat slob. Well, Jimmy down in the main lobby said he saw the fat man go into the garage. Muldoon spun around. Into the garage? When? About 10-15 minutes ago. Jesus, Muldoon said. The jeep screeched to a stop. Sorry, Harding said. In the headlamps, Ellie saw a herd of apatosaurs lumbering across the road. There were 6 animals, each the size of a house, and a baby as large as a full-grown horse. The apatosaurs moved in unhurried silence, never looking toward the jeep and its glowing headlamps. At one point, the baby stopped to lap water from a puddle in the road, then moved on. A comparable herd of elephants would have been startled by the arrival of a car, would have trumpeted and circled to protect the baby. But these animals showed no fear. Don't they see us? She said. Not exactly, no, Harding said. Of course, in the literal sense they do see us, but we don't really mean anything to them. We hardly ever take cars out at night, so they have no experience of them. We are just a strange, smelly object in their environment, representing no threat and therefore no interest. I've occasionally been out at night, visiting a sick animal, and on my way back, these fellows block the road for an hour or more. What do you do? Harding grinned. Play a recorded Tyrannosaur roar. That gets them moving. Not that they care much about Tyrannosaurs. These apatosaurs are too big, they don't really have any predators. They can break a Tyrannosaur's neck with a swipe of their tails. And they know it. So does the Tyrannosaur. But they do see us. I mean, if we were to get out of the car... Harding shrugged. They probably wouldn't react. Dinosaurs have excellent visual acuity, but they have a basic amphibian visual system. It's attuned to movement. They don't see unmoving things well at all. The animals moved on, their skin glistening in the rain. Harding put the car in gear. I think we can continue now, he said. Wu said, I suspect you may find there are pressures on your park, just as there are pressures in Genentech's drugs. He and Hammond had moved to the living room, and they were now watching the storm lash the big glass windows. I can't see how, Hammond said. The scientists may wish to constrain you, even to stop you. Well, they can't do that, Hammond said. He shook his fingers, Wu. You know why the scientists would try to do that? It's because they want to do research, of course. That's all they ever want to do is research. Not to accomplish anything. Not to make any progress. Just do research. Well, they have a surprise coming to them. I wasn't thinking of that, Hammond said. I'm sure it would be interesting for the scientists to do research, but you arrived at the point where these animals are simply too expensive to be used for research. This is wonderful technology, Henry, but it's so frighteningly expensive technology. Fact is, it can only be supported as entertainment, Hammond shrugged. That's just the way it is. But if there are attempts to close down... Face the damn facts, Henry, Hammond said irritably. This isn't America. This isn't even Costa Rica. This is my island. I own it. And nothing is going to stop me from opening Jurassic Park to all the children of the world, he chuckled. Or at least to the rich ones. And I tell you, they'll love it. In the backseat of the Jeep, Ellie Sattler stared out the window. They had been driving through rain-drenched jungle for the last 20 minutes, and had seen nothing since the apatosaurs crossed the road. We're near the jungle river now, Harding said as he drove. It's off there somewhere to our left. Abruptly, he slammed on the brakes again. The car skidded to a stop in front of the flock of small green animals. Well, you're getting quite a show tonight, he said. Those are compies. Proconsonanthids, Ellie thought, wishing that Grant were here to see them. This was the animal they had seen in the facts back at Montana. The little dark green proconsonanthids scurried to the other side of the road, then squatted on their hind legs to look at the car, chittering briefly, before hurrying onward into the night. Odd, Harding said. Wonder where they're off to. Compies don't usually move at night, you know. They climb up in the trees and wait for daylight. Then, why are they out now? Ellie said. Can't imagine. You know, compies are scavengers, like buzzards. They're attracted to a dying animal and they have tremendously sensitive smell. They can smell a dying animal for miles. Then, they're going to a dying animal? Dying or already dead. Should we follow them? Ellie said. I'd be curious, Harding said. Yes, why not? Let's go see where they're going. He turned the car around and he headed back toward the compies.